Ladies and gentlemen, ATDF everything in that shelf presentation. You're now rocking with TDF everything. Spoiled rotten.
Spoiler alert.
Welcome and welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
It's me, Daniel,
And this is Ben
on Spoiled Rotten.
on that shelf.
Well, we're here. We're at the finale of Loki Season 2, Episode 6, Glorious Purpose, which I believe is the name of the first episode of Season 1.
Absolutely.
Well, there we go. What a lovely full circle moment for everyone.
Yeah, are we at the ending or are we at the beginning?
No, it's kind of like there was a character named Ouroboros in this, and they
That's
wanted to
right.
really lean into it. I don't know.
It's clever. I like it.
They did it.
It's good. Yeah.
So we start off where we left off, which is Loki going into his body at the point where Victor's about to go through the blast doors. I guess we should say at this point that we're recording this, a tentative deal has been struck with the SAG-AFTRA and the AMTP, blah 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 blah, the Struck Studios. So that's good. Obviously, it hasn't been ratified yet, but officially the strike and picketing is over. So now it's just about making sure everyone agrees with what they got, which I know they had to make some concessions on AI, but
and the follow through. I did. We don't know the full details yet, but I do know that there are better residuals after streaming and all that kind of stuff, which is a huge thing. So this is, I mean, this is going to keep unfolding as we go, but I'm glad that there's an insight to this thing. It's good.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm glad that, I'm glad the studios came to their senses, but also sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done. To make sure that AI doesn't creep in there and
that the studios actually follow through with what they do. And so that's great. And one other thing to point out from last episode is we both got it wrong. They did. Dr. Willis is B15's real name from the timeline. Verity Willis
from the comics.
However, I will say our point still stands. They never made it explicitly clear. It's only, I thought it was a nurse that was me, saying it in the background or something like that. That's not in fact true. It's on her name tag and all that kind of stuff. In which case I'm like, oh, cool. I need an 80-inch high def, like whatever, in order to see that clearly. Damn you. It's just, they did not make it explicitly clear. They like the other characters, and that point still stands, but they did give her a name. It is Verity Willis. So we're technically wrong. I mean, but our sentiment is correct.
Something, but we will make a point of bringing it up if we remember to. So thank you for remembering.
And I will say one thing too. Won't be the last time that at least I'll speak to myself that I'm
there's
wrong.
No reason to expect that will be the last time we're wrong about something.
Yes. So please.
But yeah, we were definitely wrong. That it was there for you to see if you wanted to, and obviously in the credits. But as Ben said, I don't. The bigger point, and this isn't me moving the goalpost. The bigger point that was being made was that they didn't really spend any time with her, and you didn't get insights into her as Verity Willis the way you did for, I would say, almost everyone else that he visited. But yeah, we definitely got it wrong that you didn't get to see what her name was or hear her name.
Yeah, so I think the point still stands. They did that character dirty. They could have had multiple ways of making that front and center, and especially having Loki spend a little bit more time with her. But there it is. On to episode 6.
So yeah, he's there, and he, I guess, he tries to just. I don't really remember what his plan is initially, other than to be like, yeah, let's do this, go, and then it doesn't work. And he asks, maybe that was always his plan, just ask Ouroboros, like, hey, what did we do wrong? And Ouroboros makes it seem like they have to go faster. So they have a fun montage of trying to go faster. And then that leads to Loki being like, it's not really faster so much as sooner, like in the timeline. So another fun montage of him trying to do it at different points as opposed to just doing that segment quickly, which ends up in him asking Miss Minutes at one point to help. And I like that you don't even see what happens because clearly she was like, I'm gonna kill you.
The hell?
No,
Yeah.
no.
They're like, no, I'm not gonna. No.
So yeah, that this is a nice, fun kind of Edge of Tomorrow loop of killing a character off a bunch of times and just dusting yourself off. And I know there's other movies that do that, but that was the one that came to mind.
Oh, I'm disappointed you didn't say try again.
Dusting
Dusting yourself off and try again.
Oh, okay. I was, yeah.
Leah!
I thought you were like saying that was a movie. I was like, I don't
know.
No,
I just love
it's from a great movie, but I didn't.
Yeah. No, my ADHD mind.
But
the moment I hear a song lyric, I'm like, no, please finish it. Yeah, it's funny. I'd like to hear how like his incessantness is just fundamentally taking away free will. He's completing everyone's sentences, cutting everyone off, and all that kind of stuff. Like, no, we got to do this, and this. And I think that's an interesting aspect of this. He's fully leaning into that selfishness that he described last episode of like, no, I need to do this for this kind of thing, right?
I mean, big spoiler alert. I think this is a very strong finale, and it really, I want to give the credit to Eric Martin. I think that's the writer's name, because it does feel like, for me, this season is a course correction and in the right way, but it feels like he was actually trying to get at something throughout the course of the season for Loki in particular, and I like that. For me, it feels like he stuck the landing. So yeah, what you said is right, that he's coming at this. He's fully embraced the I'm a god thing. I'm just going to figure this out. And that throughout the course, I know we're jumping around here, but throughout the course of the episode, it's him doing what T'Challa did in Black Panther, which is like actually having conversations with people to get the information he needs to make a decision with the power he does have. And I think that is very strong. And I don't look at it like, good, you copied Black Panther, so it's good. I'm just saying, like, I think that's a strong character arc to go on. And I feel like they did it well.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, when you say course correct, are you speaking to the MCU as a meta kind of thing, or are you speaking to just the idea of what Loki is, this series of Loki?
I'll tell you this, I never mean MCU as a whole. I don't ever care to talk about stuff like that. I'm talking about what we didn't like about season one is fixed in this season, which is that I think we both felt like Loki isn't really the main character here. So then they made it like this could only happen with this Loki that we are spending time with, and he actually has an arc that is paid off instead of reset at the end.
Yeah, he's actually the main character this time.
Yeah, and I don't mean he's the main character because of where he ends up at the end, and so that's good. I mean that you actually saw him work through some stuff, and that stuck by the end of it.
Yep.
And in examples like you were just giving, that like initially he's going in like, I know what to do this, and we'll be fine, until he learns like what he's actually supposed to be doing, which is taking into consideration the people he cares about, and then facilitating that for them, as opposed to just like, no, this is what I wanted, so like we're doing this. So yeah, I think that's very strong. And yeah, after we see the montage of trying to do it earlier, he's basically like, okay, I just need to know what Ouroboros knows.
Literally everything that he knows about like mechanical engineering and everything like that.
And Victor Tom is like, no, centuries. And then it goes centuries later. So he knows he's still doing the stuff you're talking about, like cutting people off, but he knows what needs to happen now. And I like all the little details of like, hey, remember, take your right thumb, like you got to put the blaster on or else you're going to get like all these hints at what happened wrong when we saw it, but also what has happened wrong on the many times he's done this already.
And I do like the little pushback that Mobius does. Is like, what are you doing? You can't do this and all this kind of stuff. And I feel like that's just like Mobius's kind of reckoning. And talking about Mobius's character development, and this is hard because it just jumps back and forth between all that kind of stuff, right? And going back to fundamentally where we leave him at the end of the episode, where we'll leave him, but Mobius is clearly trying to gain control of the situation of like, hey, you're demanding things now. I don't like that. It was a fun kind of thing to see in that regard.
I don't know if he's trying to get control of the situation more.
Mm.
That would, to me, if I were Mobius, look like a backslide. He and
Right.
Loki had been very communicative, and
Mhm.
he's watching Loki cut him out of that.
Mhm.
And so I don't mean that in he deserves answers. It's more like, oh, like I'm no longer a partner here. Like we are not. And so I think he wants to be in the loop so he can help, as opposed to be in the loop so he can feel like he's in control.
Very valid. But yeah, you're right to point out. Yeah, he feels insecure about it because he is being cut out of the loop in this
Yeah,
for sure.
I think
Everyone is, to be
yeah,
honest.
well, I think that's the point that
Hmm.
this is getting to, right? Like he is seeing what we've already stated, which is you're
Hmm.
not actually taking us into consideration here. So what's the deal
Yeah.
here? Like what's your play? I
Yeah.
think that's more I don't think it's worthwhile to look at it as like a power play, because I don't think
Sure.
that's ultimately where they're leaning with Mobius. I think
Hmm.
we've already like he's a company man, right? Like he'll do whatever as long as he's like towing the line. So it's not necessarily like, hey, whoa, I need to. It's more just like, hey, what's the play here? I can help. Like I
Hmm.
don't. I'm just gonna stand here if I don't know what we're doing, and it seems like you've got something going on here.
Yeah, and it is Mobius recognizing fundamentally, hey, this is different.
Mhm.
You're different. You're turning into He Who Remains without saying it. It's just like you're just deciding everything for everyone
Yeah.
now, which is important.
So yeah, I looked at it more like holding him accountable, less trying
Mm,
to take control.
I like that interpretation much better, much better.
So yeah, Loki talks Victor through the whole thing, as I said, telling him like, this is what you got to do before you get out of the door. Hey, when you open the door, watch your step. That's a trip hazard. Don't lay it down. It's gonna roll off.
Hmm.
And I like that comes back. But I think everything about Victor going out the doors was effective for me. I was
Hmm.
genuinely leaning in, even on the second time I was watching it. The first time it was way more stressful. Because I was like, they've already shown like he could just die. It's not like, oh no, okay, this time it has to work. He's Loki can control time now, so he could die on this one too. So it really was like, is this going to be the one? Are they going to do it? Even when he's trying to like fit the piece into the thing, I was like, no, it's not lined up properly. Come on, man, go, let's do that. I thought all of that was really well done, and then even the cheering afterwards, I thought was very cathartic.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think this was really well paced, edited, and acted. I thought this was a very strong section of the episode.
I completely agree. I especially like when Loki's on the comms with Victor Timely, reminding him and all that kind of stuff. Especially when he's like, "Be brave," because I'm like, "There's no
Mhm.
emotion in what you're saying. You're just saying what you need to do, and all that empathy that you have that's driving you is being reduced because you're in a state of fear and loss now." That little note of like, "Be brave," and how mechanical it sounds, I think was really really good acting on Hiddleston's part, that delivery of that line.
Um, yeah. So then,
They jump back
uh,
to season one, and that's the cool
no, I
thing.
don't think so yet.
Oh yeah, they do. Well, I mean, it's important to say like they do succeed with the loom.
Yeah. So this is what I want to get to,
Yeah.
is that he's the it's working until it's not working,
Mhm.
and Victor. I know that this isn't ultimately it, which makes it hard to describe. But let's just assume we haven't seen the ending. Victor's like, this isn't gonna work because this will never account for the infinite expansion that's happening.
Mhm.
Like it's happening way too fast and forever for us to ever find something that's going to expand the rings. Is the less scientific term they use. Like we're never going to expand the rings enough. That's not. It's just not a thing. And
Mhm.
so that's when they realize, okay, so the issue is that he who remains is dead. That's what started all of this.
Mhm.
So there is nothing we can do here that will fix that.
Mhm.
So yes, then they jump back to that, but I do think it's important that we get that explanation from Victor, because I think it does set expectations moving forward that are wiped away, but at least it gives you like, okay, I see what we're doing here.
Mhm.
So that, yeah, it's this very big triumphant moment that immediately, like almost immediately, is taken away from you, and I thought
Yeah.
that was also well done. So yes, that's where Loki goes back to the end of season 1 and tries to stop Sylvie from killing He Who Remains, and I love the idea is like she's not going to. So like it really, and I like at one point he was just like, why don't you ever fight back during these things? Like you could help us, and that's funnily enough when He Who Remains actually does stop her. And my big note here was, I don't think they should or can keep Jonathan Majors, which is what it is. But
Mhm.
it's a shame because the way he does He Who Remains is amazing, and I feel like
Mhm.
it's a performance only really he could do. I like anyone could do that Kang he did in Quantum Mania. Anyone really could do Victor Timely, but there's something
Mhm.
about, and I'm not saying he's not locked in those other performances. There is something that is completely Jonathan Majors about his He Who Remains.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with him here as well. Just
Mhm.
as like this is the best variant of Kang, and I guess I'll just really have to have the cognitive dissonance of like, this is a person that probably shouldn't be working right now, putting on a great performance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
That's a really unfortunate thing, because you're right. This performance of He Who Remains is such a strong one, and it's so smart to make that performance the strongest, because you're right. Everything else, like anyone else could do those things, but
and
the
and I
idea
don't
of
say
this
that to be like they're
performance.
shit. I just mean this
Mhm.
is different, and I feel like it encompasses all of his skills as an actor instead of
Yes.
feeling like a show he's putting on.
Yeah, it's evident that he did the research. He knew what to bring to this one variant more so than anything else. Because King the Conqueror, you're right. You're just like, oh, okay, you're just a guy that wants to conquer stuff. That's not really that much range in the
To be
performance.
clear,
But
that's not what
this,
I'm getting at. But
oh, okay,
yeah, what I'm saying is he's a
Mhm.
good actor.
Yes,
That doesn't mean he's a good person or that
correct.
he's innocent. I
Hmm.
think he's a good actor, and so what he did with those characters is good. Like I think what
Hmm.
he did, we talked about it the first time we saw Victor Timely in full, not in Quantum Mania, but in full in his second episode.
Hmm.
That was a strong performance. It's a well realized character. It's just not He Who Remains. So this isn't me being like those other ones, meh. This is, he is good, and he's really clicking when he's doing He Who Remains.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think, yeah. So this I like the conversation that they're having here and how Loki ultimately wins, because obviously He Who Remains is underestimating him a bit.
Oh,
And I like
heavily.
and I
Yeah.
like that he comes back, not comes back, that it ends on him being like, and sorry, what makes you think this is the first time we're having this specific conversation?
Hmm.
And I like that He Who Remains isn't like, oh, blast, you got me again. He's just like, you know what? Good. I like
Good.
you. Score one for Loki, and I like that. I like that about you.
Yeah, you are
Um,
formidable. And I like how he says, like, how he dismisses, like, listen, why don't you just do this 1,000 more times and then we
yeah,
can have a conversation? And I'm like, that's the great stuff that I like. And I'm Loki turning the tables, like, yeah, I did do this an infinite amount of times, buddy.
yeah.
Yep.
So basically, this is where we find out that He Who Remains is like, yeah, the TVA got wiped out, but that's nothing because the loom, the only reason it's there is as a fail safe so that the sacred timeline can
Hmm.
remain. Everything else will go to shit. We can rebuild the TVA. That's not a problem. Not a big
Hmm.
deal. Just, it's not meant to, house all of this. It never will. There's nothing you can do. I guess this is the answer to why it won't work. Uh,
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, he's basically no. It's just a failsafe, and it's just to protect this sacred timeline. I don't give a shit
Absolutely.
about anything else.
And I like that they get to that point finally, because I'm always like, hey, the same minds that are creating the problems cannot be the ones that solve it. And this is where Loki finally gets it. He's like, okay, I he's been doing the TVA stuff, which is Victor Timely or Boreas and all that kind of stuff. They're doing the same things to enhance or work on the TVA, the loom, and all that. They're not thinking outside the box in order to solve this, right? Because I like when He Who Remains goes like, you have two options. And I'm like, whenever someone says you have two options, they have reduced it down to two options for you, while because they haven't thought of anything else in that kind of regard. So it's such an interesting exploration of these kind of issues, of why systems fail and what they're designed to do and all
I
those
do
kind
want
of
to say,
things.
I think it's actually that's what Loki did and not what He Who Remains said. I think when Loki, it's what I was talking about
Mhm.
in that episode 4 debate. That's what Loki was doing. Was like, it's this or this. That's all you got. That's him not fully understanding the scope of what needs to happen. He Who
Right.
Remains is invested in keeping it the way. So it's not that he
Mhm.
hasn't thought of it. It's that he only wants this to happen. Is
Yeah.
a difference. I think that should be made clear that there is a difference to not underestimate how invested the people at the top are in keeping status quo. It's not that they haven't thought of what's going to happen. They've actually put a lot of thought into
Yes.
that. It's their job to make you feel like there's only the two options.
And
Whereas
yeah.
that was Loki buying into those two options in episode 4.
And yeah, that's what I'm pointing out, is the fact that He Who Remains is doing such a good job of being like, here are the two options I'm presenting to you because you're so tired, you're so exhausted, you're so defeated that you're going to most likely believe me, as opposed to actually trying to find another option and thinking outside the box, right? Because to this point, he's very much operating within what He Who Remains has designed. And even He Who Remains says that. It's like, who do you think paved the way for you to be able to do this too? And just kind of doing that, just try to take that agency away from Loki and that ability to move away and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's great stuff in this scene. I'm such strong exploration of these competing interests.
Yeah. So then, yeah, that's where Loki's like, yeah, I'm just gonna break your loom, and He Who Remains leaves. It gives him you do that, then everything's gone, even the sacred timeline. So you can't do that one either. And Loki goes back to season 1. I can't remember if that's episode 1. It's got to be episode 1, right?
It's got to be episode 1.
He's in the time theater, and he's like, yeah, get it. You're gonna show me all this, and we see. I think obviously the He Who Remains scene was him collecting information, obviously, and then this is another more overt collection of information of him just actively being like, how do you do it? Because I think the He Who Remains conversation is like, okay, so it has to be me doing this. I'm gonna be the one who does it, but that's gonna take a toll on me. And I thought this was another strong scene of Mobius sharing the time that he fucked up and couldn't prune a kid. Renslayer had to step in and do it, and he's like, yeah, there's no like glory here. It's all just burden, and you're not gonna find any comfort here in what you do. And I like Loki being like, so then how do you keep doing it? And Mobius like, scar tissue. And I'm like, yeah, there you go. Just gonna make yourself numb to this.
Yeah, bring it back to the skin element. And that's why I like when Mobius, that reoccurring theme of like, my skin, I'm gonna lose my skin, I'm gonna lose my skin, because like he cares about the skin that he has, but he's neglecting and he's neglecting the scar tissue, or at least not trying to think about that too, which is why he goes for pie in those moments, right? This is such a strong scene.
And to keep, he also says to Loki, like, Renslayer is able to keep her eyes on the big picture. I didn't want to say prize, on the big picture, because I think that's the point that Loki's missing as well. Like, yes, you want to protect your friends, but like, what does that actually mean? Instead of just that's the big picture he was missing there. Even though it's coming from what Renslayer does, it's still someone who he values opinion on a situation. So I think that's why it's fine that it's Renslayer that he's quoting there, because it's like, well, that's your interpretation of it, and that's why you think things work, and you mean so much to Loki that's what he'll take on.
Yeah, because keeping your eyes on the big picture is good advice in this kind of situation is just everyone's big picture is very fundamentally different, as proved by Renslayer's actions and Loki's
Yeah,
actions.
which is why I like that he's collecting information
Mhm.
from different points of view, because that would
Absolutely.
give you the actual big picture instead of just a picture of what's
Yep.
going on.
Yep. And that comes back later on in the episode, which I can't wait to get to too. But I like the fact that multiple points in this episode, Sylvie's like, "See, you're thirsty for the throne," and you know, even to this scene, one of the most important things is he kind of like slips back into his body after the point in time where he hits the delivery of, "I don't want to be king. I was born to be."
Mm-hmm.
And that is such a nice recurring through line throughout this whole episode. It's like, I was born to be, I don't want to be. And that's so cool of how this plays out. um and I think Mobius saying there's no comfort, you pick your burden. And I'm like, cool, yep, that's the most real shit ever. You can't have that naivety at this point of like, oh, how do I get a win for everyone? It's just, nope, you gotta recognize the reality of the situation. Some great developmental stuff happening here.
Uh, then Loki goes to the end of season 2, episode 5, to talk to
Mhm.
Sylvie, and basically, I like that Sylvie's like, right, so you have to kill me, because like even me in this point, I know I'm not gonna not kill he who
Mhm.
remains. That's just a thing that's gonna happen. So I'm not giving you permission to do it, but like I understand that's what you're saying is that you gotta, and that, but then he kind of is like, well, no, like what do you think should happen? Like if it needed to be something that was there, what is the version of it that you think makes sense?
Mhm.
Again, the like the thirst for finding information from people, that's not exactly the way I wanted to put it, but that's what he's doing. He's like the pursuit of knowledge here, of like, okay,
Mhm.
instead of me finishing your lines for you, you tell me like what what it is you envision.
And I like the line that Sylvie delivers here of, you're replacing one nightmare with another, like calling him out. I was like, this is essentially what you're doing right now. There's a Sylvie just does so much great, insightful things to force Loki to reckon with everything that he's actually doing right now. Um, it's such great scenes, such great like character development here for sure.
Yeah, so then this is the final push to him being like, okay, I guess I'll do it. I can do this better. I've learned what I need to learn, and
Mhm.
I'll be able to run things better than he who remains.
Mhm. And
So that's
it,
what he does.
mhm.
He goes to after. I'm assuming after um, Victor is spaghettified and goes out.
No, before he just it's to the point where Victor just opens up the gates, and then he's like, all right, I'm gonna do this, watch the throne, baby. And
I'll
then
say that's what I
he does
initially
that.
thought, but he's not actually in that scene, so I'm assuming it's after.
Victor.
Yeah, he's nowhere, anywhere to be seen.
Well, yeah, he is. Like, he scans a thing first, and then Loki just runs down, and he's like doing it, and they're all kind of watching him,
They
like, what the
scan.
hell's he doing?
They scan
Yeah,
Victor. Okay.
yep. Because that's the
Okay.
only way they can open the thing, right? So Victor is a part of that. He's just not a relevant part of
Well,
that
what I was
scene.
saying was, you're right, sure. But what I'm saying is, if it was after he died, the doors would still be open. It wouldn't.
Correct.
Yeah. But if you're saying you watched him get scanned, then fine.
Mhm.
But
And
my feeling was to close off everything. It would have made more sense if he did it after Victor was gone.
right, and I think he did it right before, because this is him finally accepting the self-sacrificial route that he ultimately chooses
Yeah.
to create, like, hey, I don't want to be alone. I just, but I want the best for my friends. He's not thinking about this from himself
Well,
anymore. He's thinking
this is the
about
second half,
everyone
right?
else.
Like,
Yeah.
so, um, Sylvie tells him like, your friends are where they need to be. And he's like,
Hmm.
well, then where do I belong? And then this is him realizing where he belongs.
Yep.
This is the answer to writing his own story, and they get to write their own story, because I think while he's doing his rearrangement of timelines, so Sylvie says, "Oh, he's giving us a chance." Like
Hmm.
that's what he's doing. Um.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone can write their own story now under Loki's watchful eye.
Hmm.
Uh, and then we see the TVA. To be honest, I checked out during this part, but yeah, you see the
Mm.
TVA because I'm like, this was not great. But yeah, the TVA still exists. I don't really know what they do. I'm assuming it's
So
the same thing. It's just Loki's the one telling them who to prune.
well, I don't think they've really figured out what they're doing right now. But what I do like about this is that they're, the visual representation of, and I think this is what they're going for, the Asgardian tree of life, with the above and below and all that kind of stuff. But the idea of what I said like last episode that B-15 is going to lead by committee. And I think this is exactly that representation of B-15, like being like, hey, Casey, Obi, we're all going to the war room right now. I don't know why they still call it the war room. That's kind of daunting, but
So this is what I mean. This is exactly what I mean by the TVA needed to go, because
yeah,
this is too much of like a liberal, like, oh, you just need more black prison guards, and then things like, what is the prison guard there to do? Does it feel better if it's a black person doing it versus
no, it does not.
So
But
that is what I meant. So like that's why I tuned out, because I was like, it won't really matter to me. I'm not going to feel any catharsis out of seeing someone who's normally oppressed do the oppressing.
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, I completely see your point. I'm given who's at the table in that scene, how they're sitting and all that kind of stuff. I'm just like, is this a meeting that's like, okay, what does the TVA stand for now? Do we stand to support life? Do we like provide all that kind of stuff, or prune and all that? Because fundamentally it does change, and they're learning, they're reprogramming Miss Minutes to be like, how do we make sure that she doesn't, go off the AI rails again and all that? So to me, I'm just like, is this them trying to figure out what to do now with the TVA? Because I think that's,
Yeah.
if that's what they were doing.
They're still using the terminology, meaning it's not a far step from them just slipping back into what they were doing.
I completely agree.
And they needed to just do something else.
Mm-hmm.
That was the point of what we were going through, especially in this episode, which is you don't just have the option of keeping the TVA, but reforming it versus abolishing.
Mm-hmm.
You could get rid of it and think outside the box.
Yep.
But yeah, so you see that, and then you see they make a reference to Quantum Mania when they're like, yeah, the Kang, they figured it out. Don't worry, he's out.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I would imagine their main goal, again, basically just doing what the TVA was doing when we first met them, which is instead of looking for Lokis to prune, they're looking for Kangs to control. Kang variants, I'm assuming, is the idea there.
That would be rational. I didn't think about that, but that sounds right, given how he was like, "You won't find us all." I'm like, this agency might, if that's their primary goal.
So yeah, that goes on, and then Mobius goes back to see what his life is like on the timeline, which I liked. I liked that. Sylvie's there, and she's like, "Oh, it's weird without Loki," and he's like, "Yeah, I know." And they have a couple of jokes, and she's like, "So what are you gonna do?" And I thought that was a nice place to leave it, with him just being like, well, I know that's not the actual last scene, but I think it's the last bit of dialogue with just him being like, I'm just gonna wait here and let time pass, because obviously in the TVA time doesn't really work like that. So I like that he, instead of having him be on a jet ski or whatever, it's him just being able to enjoy this simplicity that we all take for granted of actually being able to feel time pass.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the most important things to be recognizing that the biggest currency we have is time. And if we don't appreciate the moment that we have in the moment, then we're just wasting our own time, right? Which is, why I fundamentally love that emotional beat of, I'm just going to let time pass. I'm just going to be present for once, as opposed to all that kind of stuff. It's a great conclusion, or where to leave his character off. I mean, yeah, the visual of the jet ski, we already got that the previous episode, right? We don't need it again. And to know that he is not wanting to be a company man, and that he wants to enjoy the things that do matter to him, which is a family, that love and all that kind of stuff, which is fundamentally, I think, for the most part, what a lot of people want is that sense of belonging. that he just gets to enjoy the fact that he belongs to something aside from a corporate structure, which is what he's made his whole identity around, so to speak, is he now gets to evolve and think and retire, so to speak. What is outside of retirement for those people that have built their identities around their work? It's a great thing to see. I really like that way more than putting him in some Sea-Doo that would have been silly to me and been like, oh, fan service.
Yeah, I think that was a good payoff to the character.
OB gets the second edition of the TVA handbook, which is kind of neat.
You see that Victor Timely doesn't have a version of it, so he could just continue making candles. And Renslayer's it's the void, right? That's what they call it.
Yeah, that's void.
And she's gonna be eaten by Alioth, or in season 3, turn Alioth to her like friend. I don't know,
her pet,
but
yeah,
like her. Well, yeah, like just another co-conspirator. But yeah, I think she's facing off with him. I liked her acting in that, like the tear that goes up in her eye when you're like, all right, she's like, all right, this is something I'm gonna have to reckon with right now. I'm probably gonna die. So yeah, that happens, and then does it just show you Loki?
Then it just shows you Loki supporting the Tree of Life. At that point, that's what I have. Renslayer vs the Void, in the Void vs Alioth, Mobius. The job is done. I think the Renslayer thing might have come before the Mobius, but I don't think that's relevant to what we're talking about right now.
I think you're right that Renslayer comes before Mobius' stuff.
Yeah,
but
it's that final beat is Loki, alone.
He has his purpose now.
Yes, and it is a glorious purpose.
Yes,
that's the great thing, and a glorious burden, as Mobius indicates, because his biggest fear is being alone, right? In the previous episode, but in this episode, he now realizes his biggest fear is that a world can exist where his friends aren't. He'd rather support his friends and be alone than to selfishly make everything about him, which is great for this character. I think it's absolutely amazing. The question ultimately ends up being, will we see Loki again? Because this just seems like, all right, well, if we don't have him doing this, who's going to hold this all together now? So will we see Loki ever again? Probably.
Can't he? Because like he can just time slip and like freeze things. Like he can always just come back to before things went wrong on whatever timeline he wasn't paying attention to.
I don't know, but because like he's not on a timeline right now.
Yeah, so I think you can see him again. I don't think this would stop him.
Well, I mean, from the meta of everything, there is hope that we're going to see him again, because there has been discussions and interviews that the plan is to get Thor and Loki back together at some point in the MCU. So will we see him again, or will we see a variant of him again, or whatever? It's just where they've left him here. It really does leave everything in question of okay, this does seem like he's been written off into the sunset, because it doesn't, we don't know where it can go until Secret Wars or Kang Dynasty comes back, realistically. But
I mean, I think this was a nice place to end it, because this is the Loki that would have been trapped after Avengers, so he doesn't have the depth of relationship with Thor that the one that died in Infinity War does. So it's like, do I want to backtrack and have them get up to speed, or just know that they both had good endings? Like both versions of Loki that we spent significant amount of time with have nice endings. I know that's not going to stop them from trying to put them back together, but I think that would be a mistake to try and do, because they don't actually have that relationship. So it would be putting them together, as you said, for like fan service of good, they're back together, but it's like not really. I would expect you would want them to have a conversation then about like what happened, and I think that's just a waste of time.
And this is the thing. I do think that this Loki has surpassed that Loki that you're talking about in the Infinity War stuff, because of how he views how he's reflected on those events that he has experienced, right? Knowing that, I thought Thor coming back with empathy was weak. I realized that strength. I'm like, this is I do expect, like, if there is a scene where they're together, that this is a Loki that's surpassed that level of where we saw him in Infinity War, where he was self-sacrificial there too. All that kind of stuff. I I'm interested in see where that goes, but to me, the character that's not as evolved is obviously Thor in this
Yeah,
situation.
that's what I'm saying is
Yeah.
that they didn't have that experience together, so it's
Oh,
like,
I see.
it's kind of like, all right, I don't really need to see them together because they don't have that connection. Like his connection is with the characters in Loki, this more advanced one, not
Hmm.
Thor, and Thor's connection is to the Infinity War
Hmm.
and Loki. So
Yeah.
yes, this Loki could come back and be like, "Oh, I went through this whole journey," but it's like, well, okay, cool,
Yeah. Yeah.
because Thor isn't there yet with
Yes.
the what has gone on.
And I think it's cool, the multiple aspects of what the ruler of Loki looks like in the past, with, like, that the thing with the Ragnarok, and how he ruled there with hedonism, and now he's just like, he's reluctantly on the throne because he knows he needs to be. Again, that through line of, like, I don't want to be, I was born to be, really shines through here, versus in the past where he wanted to be king or wanted the throne. It looked fundamentally very, very different, right? So it is him
Well, I
integrating
mean,
that
it's a
Mobius
completely
thing.
different scale.
Oh, absolutely. It's completely different, but it's the idea of, he here is like, oh, I'm accepting this, like with Mobius's advice, this is the burden. It's not a joy. It's not a
Mhm.
comfort. It is a burden. And that's where I love where this character's ended up, because I'm like, holy character development. Great, great stuff here. Love it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
why I wouldn't want to see him with Thor, because then you're just backtracking on stuff.
No, I agree. I agree with that. Which is, right now, I mean, that's and the MCU seems to be backtracking a lot of stuff for their own profit margins. Who knows?
Yeah.
Cowards.
Um.
Um, I guess we got to
So
rate this thing, right?
yeah, I mean, I think yeah. What I wanted to just revisit just
Mm-hmm.
what I thought was strong about this finale, but also the season, which is um yeah, like last season, I can fully explain it now that we've gone through the whole thing, which was like the whole thing that He Who Remains had was like, not all of this would have happened anyway. You mean nothing. Like this is you're irrelevant to this. You're a flea on a dragon's back. And I was like, that really shines through by the end of that episode. You're like, yeah, I guess none of this mattered and he's not really important. And then he's alone. But this time he's alone, but he is in service to his friends who know him
Mm-hmm.
and love him. And as you said, and I agree with, this could only be this version of Loki that's doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So it recenters him and refocuses on the title character, and he levels up the way that I feel all the characters they've done a show for that we previously knew have leveled up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously, with Scarlet Witch, she leveled up into a villain, but she, like, there was a progression that happened, or a regression, if you want to say. But they fundamentally changed these characters, and I think they finally got there with Loki on season 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I haven't thought too much to speak to that point about the Scarlet Witch thing, but you're right in the sense where every character really does develop in their own Disney show. But this is the one where it is front and center, the development of this character, the evolution of this character. It is I think one of the better explorations, and took the format of long-term format to really explore these things really, really well. Do I wish they had shined a light on other characters to do that with a little bit more in this episode? Absolutely. In this series, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
B15, more B15, absolutely. But it for the titular character to
Yeah, I just
actually
meant like the
shine,
characters we knew ahead of time. Because
absolutely
obviously, like,
wonderful.
what am I going to say about Moon Knight? That's the first time we're seeing him, and I don't think Hawkeye was successful, so that's whatever.
I
But
agree.
like, but I think Falcon, I would say that is what works best about Falcon and Winter Soldier is
Mhm.
his progression is the whole point of it. I know that people don't like to think of that, but that is the whole. Why would he take the shield? That whole show is, why is he going to take the shield?
Mhm.
And they come at it from multiple angles, and then they land on what they land on.
Yeah.
I think we both agreed that the progression of Nick Fury was central to Secret Invasion, even though it's not a great show. They at least accomplished those moments with pushing his character forward. So I think this season of Loki did what the other shows, based on characters we already knew before Disney Plus was a thing. I think this did that well, and maybe the best, but still it did it well like the other ones did. And I'm glad they got there.
Yeah, they really stuck the landing on this. I completely agree, and similar to the Captain America and the Winter Soldier series, it is putting someone in a position that's like, yeah, I'm not going to be liked by everyone, and this is, again, he chose his burden in that, right? In the sense where it's like, I have to take the shield, even though I know, and he says this, even though I know half the people that see me hate me for it and all this kind of stuff, I will still do this role because he knows he has that purpose of calling out those UN people, so to speak, of like, if you're making these decisions, who's in the room with you? What are you thinking? All this kind of stuff. Like, what are you doing here? And him challenging that narrative is his whole point. It doesn't matter that he doesn't have the superhero soldier serum. He embodies that characteristic.
He's someone that talks through things with people. That's how you meet him. He like works at the VA, and he's like counseling people. So yeah, I am sad that I understand why people like to shit on that show. And I've heard people on podcasts be like, "Oh, like Loki's the only show that has like purpose behind what they're doing." I'm like, no, that's just not true. And that's not me like trying to stand up for all of the shows, but I think WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier in particular were very like laser focused on how they wanted to develop those main characters and the meaning behind things, even visually. Like people can go back and listen to our Falcon and Winter Soldier episodes. There's so much, like down to like the first scene of showing like how Black people are asked to be complicit in their in their what's the word I'm looking for here? They're being asked to be complicit in their oppression, like by being like, hey, this white guy's going to take the shield and we're going to film it at this Black school and show you all the Black people cheering on the white guy. That's going to like visually, that's telling you a lot. You can laugh at them just doing a thing, but to not understand that, and we already talked about, they don't live that experience as white people, but that show spoke to me so much and what it meant that I don't care that, before COVID, this was the storyline. It's like, I mean, what's there is pretty meaningful to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And what it's trying to talk about. Same with WandaVision. And I think WandaVision works because it's like the first one out of the gate that's really dealing with the grief stuff. Obviously, most of, I guess, all of Phase 4 is dealing with grief. Phase 4 is grief. Yeah. But because WandaVision's first out the gate, you're like, okay, great. Like, way to set the tone for what you're going to be talking about. And it was a great deep dive onto Wanda and Vision.
Yeah, and trauma and how not dealing with the issue and living in your own fantasy worlds it is only hurtful to everyone else around you and all that kind of stuff. And you're in those situations and all that. It's, people criticize Phase 4 for not having a direction. I'm like, you just don't understand or see the direction, and you don't agree with it, and you wanted big explosions and all that kind of stuff, and that's for you. But the way they processed material and their subject matter, to me, Phase 4 was so clear. Like you said, with WandaVision, because it's like, we're talking about grief now, and
look what happened to the world. We're gonna watch characters deal with grief. Sometimes it's directly connected to those events, and other times you're just going to watch people that have to go through grief because this universe as a whole is grieving.
And for the most part, our whole world is grieving, and for that Phase 4 to have that theme during that period of time, and for the people that get it, you can see where their emotional levels are at now versus the people that don't get it. It's like, oh, you're choosing to live in that reality. You're choosing to not grow and not deal with what everyone dealt with during the pandemic, and
Mhm.
everyone had mental health struggles. Like there's so many people there that are like, oh, I didn't have any issues with mental with my mental health during the pandemic. I'm like, oh, you don't know what you dealt with. That's the issue. You're
Mhm.
refusing to deal with it.
Yeah.
And this is MCU pushing it into our faces, like we got to deal with our trauma, we got to deal with our grief, we got to talk through things. And Wakanda Forever did such a great job of that, and there's so many good
Yeah,
explorations of this.
not everything in Phase 4
Yeah.
was great, but what I'm saying is
Mhm.
it had a focus, and
Yes.
I think that you can just be out on it. That's fine, but
Yeah.
uh, even though I said I understand, like it's still frustrating to watch people whose ostensibly their job they get paid to have deep thought into these things, just being like, no, this
Mhm.
sucked, or like, yeah. So it's just like, I don't know.
Yeah, and
Maybe
that's
think about it a
that's
little bit more.
and yeah, and that's the issue with the business side of things, right? Because obviously, how much of that is pandering, how much of that is clickbait, how much of that is driven by the numbers and the analytics and all that kind of stuff, versus, what you and I are committed to is like, no, let's explore what they're actually putting out there, as opposed to let's complain about what we wanted instead, which is seems
That
like
is
what a lot of people.
100% what I've come down to. It's just like,
Mhm.
got it. Maybe we need to retire. This thing sucks because it's not what I envisioned before I watched it.
100%,
Maybe
100%. I think
maybe
it's
that should be
so.
retired as a criticism.
It
No
should
matter how
be.
fancily you say it or how much set dressing you put on it, if your argument comes down to this isn't what I wanted it to be, then you know
Or
maybe
it did.
that's
Yeah.
maybe recuse yourself from talking about it then if you can't look
Yeah.
past that.
Yeah, and it's a shame. It's a shame that people won't review what is there, but only complain about what they wanted instead. And I'm
Yeah,
like, that's just living in a fantasy world. And
and that
um,
goes beyond like MCU stuff. I mean, like
100%.
even if you're talking about like if people wanted to complain about uh let's say
Turning red.
Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
No, I'm trying to think of something that's like just down the line, like a biopic. This really happened. What were your
Mm,
expectations? Not some genre piece or anything like that. Like let's say, and there's again, I like Oppenheimer. I'm not saying you have to like Oppenheimer, but if
mhm.
your thing was how come they didn't do this thing, I don't know. How
Yeah.
what what are we getting out of that conversation?
Yeah, it's what are we getting out of it, right? I mean, there's certain things where I'm like, okay, in regards to biopic, like the Bohemian Rhapsody one, I'm like, oh, they played it safe. That's just me, but I will
That
just
movie also
analyze
lost
what's.
its director, so like it was in shambles.
I know, but if we're thinking about biopics and all that kind of,
Yeah,
that's the first thing that came to mind. But it's the idea of like, okay, are we as critics doing our job if we are just projecting what we wanted as opposed to what is actually reviewing what's actually there? And I
yeah,
think that's what a
because
lot of critics have gotten away from.
like when I say something like there's a scene missing because we just started episode 2 and we don't really fully understand, that's not me complaining because it's not what I wanted. It's me being like, I'm at a loss here because some information is being withheld or just completely absent that would
Yeah.
help me understand what's happening. Not like, you know what, in the comics they have this one scene and they didn't put it in, so this sucks.
That is, yeah, that you're absolutely right. Because what we're talking when we make those criticisms, I'm like, oh, this is about story structure. This is about
Yeah.
the fundamentals of storytelling, as opposed to, oh, they race swapped her. I'm like, oh, shut up.
Yeah.
Like, that's not good criticism at all. And it's just like when I think about people that are one, like when people reviewed Turning Red, and they were like, I don't understand this. This is not for me. I'm like, oh, you don't. Yeah, of course, a story about a young woman going into puberty, that is a person of color. I understand how a cis white man cannot identify with that. But if your premise is not to review the content that's there and just project your own insecurities onto it, I lose respect for that criticism. I really, really do.
Yeah. Well, that's what Brie Larson was talking about.
Yes.
I watched it again, and it's like I don't think she could have been any clearer on what her
Yeah.
stance was. But anyway, let's rate this. Let's do it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it an 8.5. I thought the season was really strong. I have my disagreements with its overall politics, and as I said, I really wanted B15 to shine a bit more, but I can't deny that they did a great job of refocusing on Loki and making it clear what they wanted to do on the outset and following through and sticking the landing.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna give it a 9. One of the things I said in the last episode was I'm gonna be so disappointed if the result of this is him alone. But here's the thing. Yeah, it's him alone, but not in this service kind of aspect. This is so much better than anything that I could have been like, oh, there's different layers of him being alone, and this is just so much better than anything I could have expected.
Yeah.
Right? So they really surpassed my expectations. They stuck the landing. It was a great series. Amazing acting overall by everyone. And it just really, the only knock is, like you said, one of the strongest characters, B-15. Could have used more of that. I personally, if I was wishing, I would like more of the kind of history stuff where they kind of, the Frank Alcatraz thing and the DB Cooper thing. But I mean, like, I'm reviewing what they gave us, and I loved what they gave us with the Alcatraz thing, especially. That was really, really fun. So this is a 9 for me. Great series.
Also, I want to say that I think early on it was spoiled for me where Loki would end up, and I thought, it's probably why I like this episode so much, is they still, like, as I said, there was a lot of tension and like suspense that I had during this, even though I knew what the final shot of him would be and everything. And I was just like, I mean, they really did a good job of building up to that. Like, it didn't hurt that I knew that that's where they were going to go with it. It just made it like, it made me lean in even more to be like, wow, how are they going to accomplish that? And as you said, they stuck the landing. I thought it was really well done.
So I luckily didn't get the ending spoiled for me. I thought I got it spoiled for me because I read a comment that's like, oh, Loki's the one that starts the multiversal war and all that kind of stuff, and he's the one that frees the Kangs and all that. And I'm like, where are these people getting this information?
I don't know what they're talking about. I mean,
Right.
Ultimately, yeah, by not killing Sylvie, that is, if you want to pin it on him, that is him freeing the Kangs. But it's a stupid way of looking at it, but I see why someone would say that. But yeah, because he's ultimately being like, yeah, I'm not killing Sylvie to protect those things from happening. But again, yeah, I'm not saying, yeah, like, I completely see what, I understand how they would come to that conclusion. It's just it's not really the right way to look at it.
And to me, I'm like, I thought it was ruined, and the fact that it wasn't, just so good for me personally. I'm sorry that it was ruined for you, or spoiled for you, but but getting there, it's all about the journey. It's not about the destination, and this was a great journey.
Yeah, they did a good job on this season of television. Well, thank you very much for listening, everybody. We're part of the That Shelf Podcast Network with other great shows like Bad Game Movies, Conscious in Pod, Springfield, Googleplex. So please go to thatshelf.com. You'll find those shows, our show, and even more shows. If you want to hear older episodes of our show, you can go on all the different podcast platforms. We're also at tdfeverything.com/spoiledrotten. And if you want to get in touch with us, we're at tdfspoiled on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. So please rate, review, subscribe, follow, share, do all that great stuff, and get in touch with us. The plan is to next week have our review of the Marvels out. So yeah,
can't wait to do that one.
We are getting to that, just not in the same week. We will space out our content a bit more than that. But yeah, this week you'll hear our finale. You're listening to it, obviously, and then next week we'll have our Marvels episode out for you. All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
This has been a TDF Everything production, brah.